What is the first thing that comes to mind as a no-no if I want to be financially wealthy?
The more common advice that I think you should avoid, if your goal is to become financially independent at a young age, you probably don't want to go buy a house. It's a very controversial thing to say. The reason you don't want to buy a house is because houses dramatically inflate by and large your cost of living. You're putting your capital into that house, and now it's not going to be earning thing. It's going to be sitting idly. Along with owning a house, you have the expenses of maintaining it, paying the taxes on it, blah, blah, blah. If you stay in a apartment that is just enough to meet your needs, which, by the way, is what my daughter has done and continues to do, your costs will be lower.
Explain that to me. Explain why my cost of living goes up if I buy a house.
Sure. So it doesn't have to, but people typically buy the most house they can possibly afford. The industry drives them that way. If you go to a real estate agent and you say, I want to buy a house, right? First question they're going to ask you is, how much do you make? How much do you want to spend? And then you go to the bank and you say, okay, I want to buy a house. How much will you lend me? And they'll say, well, how much do you make? And then they'll come back with a large number of how much they're willing to lend you. If you follow those guidelines, you're going to wind up with a house that's going to be a burden. You are not buying it from a position of strength. You are stretching to buy it. You are borrowing the most money a bank's willing to give you. You probably don't want to do that. I mean, you can. The bank wants you to do that because that's how they make the most money. But that's not the best thing for you to do. But that's what you get drawn into. And then when you buy that house, I don't know that I've ever known anybody, including me, by the way, and I've owned houses most of my adult life, who's owned a house without doing renovations on it. So you've got those costs. You're going to furnish that house because you're probably buying more square footage than you were renting before. You're going to need new furniture, or maybe you just want better furniture for your new house. Maybe new appliances, landscaping, taxes, maintenance. I mean, the list is endless, and people say, well, I can buy this house, and my mortgage is the same as my rent. Well, yeah, but your mortgage is just the starting point. You've got all these other expenses with the house, and the other thing is they are variable expenses.
Variable expenses.
Yeah, with your rent, if you're renting an apartment, you're paying $2,500 a month for your apartment, right? You know exactly what your housing costs are for the term of your lease, $2,500 a month. If you own a house, maybe your mortgage is $2,500 a month. And then you need a new roof. Now, that's $20,000. Or you need a new septic system, which, by the way, I'm looking at having to put into my cottage. That's another $25,000, right? And you don't necessarily know when those things are going to come at you.
It is a bit of a trap, isn't it? It's a trap that I didn't realize this until I bought a house. And
most people don't.
I even sit here on this podcast doing this for a living, and then I made this stupid mistake of buying a house. And I do think it was a stupid mistake because we'll talk about opportunity costs in a second, but in hindsight, it was like a terrible decision. I spent all this money on this house. It was a house abroad. It was also like a holiday home, I guess. Right. And every time I come, all I see is things that I need to change.
Yeah, it's looking at the United States, for instance, if 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you bought a house in San Francisco, well, you've done very, very well financially. If you bought a house in Detroit, not so much. So then the question becomes, and people will say, well, obviously you don't buy a house in Detroit, you buy a house in San Francisco. Well, I'm not an expert in real estate, but I am reading more and more commonly that San Francisco has a lot of very challenging problems at the moment. Detroit, on the other hand, where I was just visiting a couple of years ago, is enjoying a renaissance. Detroit's coming back. So who's to say in 20, 30 years, people won't be saying, you bought in Detroit back in 2025, you were golden. And if you bought in San Francisco, yeah, not so much. Sometimes real estate, buying a house, can work out in a spectacular fashion. And that's the stories people tend to hear, but not always.
And that's what I tend to see in the comment section when we talk about this issue of buying a house. I was just looking at the comment section, actually, and on a previous conversation where we talked about whether you should buy a house, someone said, I bought a house and it's the best thing I ever did.
Right.
It's launched my mindset in new directions. Remember that having your own space has profound psychological impacts and can be life-changing for some that don't live in a healthy environment. The psychological impact of buying a house.
What that commenter just said is can be, and for him, obviously, it's absolutely true. I am not anti-house. As I mentioned a moment ago, I've owned houses most of my adult life. But I've never bought them because I thought they were an investment. I bought them because I thought they would enhance my life in a way I wanted it enhanced. They would make my life better. They are, in my view, an expensive indulgence. I have nothing against expensive indulgences. That's one of the reasons we accumulate money, right? I like some expensive and some I don't care about, some I like. But that's what they are. And if you can easily afford it, then by all means, buy the house.
Looking at some stats here, it says home buying was once a solid investment due to rising property values and lower mortgage rates. However, for younger generations, this is no longer the case because of skyrocketing home prices. Since 1980, US home prices have increased by over 300%, outpacing inflation and wage growth. In 2023, mortgage rates surged past 7%, making monthly payments significantly higher than before, and median wages have only risen by about 15% since the year 2000, while home prices have more than doubled, making home ownership less affordable. And lastly, the cost of renting is often cheaper than buying, especially in cities where prices have outpaced wage growth, leading many younger people to choose renting for flexibility. This point of flexibility as well is one we don't talk about.
Right.
Which is the ability to go do something else in another country.
Exactly.
And my brother said this to me when I was 20. My brother's very smart. He's a year older than me, financial genius, and has a much different brain to mine. And I remember when I was 20, maybe 24, and I was talking about, do I buy a house? And he both told me it was the worst investment I could ever make. But he also told me to think about flexibility and my ability to get up and move.
Yes.
And I was, what do you mean? And he said, well, listen, you're in a certain era of your career where you might be called by someone in San Francisco who offers you a great opportunity, and you might want to go next week. And actually, when I look at how my career transpired, that's exactly what happened. I was in Plymouth, and then I went to Manchester for business. Then I went to London for business. Then I went around the world to San Francisco, to New York for business. And I'm moving with the opportunity. And if I was anchored somewhere, because a mortgage
You'd
does...
be dragging that along.
Yeah, and a mortgage does like psychologically anchor you. This is what people don't talk about. It creates a huge amount of guilt if you then want to get up and go because you in your head you're going, well, I'm going to be paying double.
Well, I agree with everything you said. I agree with your brother. Flexibility, especially when you're young and your career is in a dynamic phase, it is not to be underrated. For my daughter, I mean, she loves living in Savannah. They've been there for 3 years. But she has an adventuresome soul. And, you know, she said, I don't know. I mean, maybe at some point I'll want to go live in Europe or somewhere else. Well, if you have a house, that complicates that decision. And even if you are fortunate enough to buy in a market where your values are rising, the cost associated with buying and selling houses are enormous. The real estate commission and the taxes and what have you. So getting in and out of a house is an expensive proposition. Getting in and out of an apartment doesn't cost anything. I mean, maybe your security deposit, right? But that's it. That's very clean and simple. But if you were to buy a house in Savannah and then to say, I think I want to go live in Portugal, well, now you got to sell that house, or maybe you have to rent it. Now you're a landlord. You're an accidental landlord, which was subject to my second book. That's not optimal. I mean, if you set out to be a landlord, great. But if you become an accidental landlord because you can't sell your house that you don't want to live in anymore, that's not so great. So flexibility is enormously important.
If I were to ask you, what is the simple path to wealth, and you had to respond in a sentence, what would that sentence be?
Avoid debt, live on less than you earn, invest the surplus.
So let's talk about debt then.
Okay.
Why did you say avoid debt?
You can never be financially independent if you're carrying around debt. It's a ball and chain that you drag along, especially consumer debt. Now, to be clear, if you're in business and your business is carrying debt as a function of running the operation for one reason or another, that's kind of a different thing. But in terms of personal debt, if you're running up credit card debt, if you're leasing expensive cars or borrowing money to buy expensive cars or what have you, possibly a mortgage is in a slightly different category, but it has all the disadvantages we just talked about. Yeah, debt's a ball and chain. It's like asking a swimmer to compete and strapping a weight around their waist. Is it possible? Sure, I guess it is, but it's a whole lot more difficult. So job one, if you have debt, is to blow it out.
And I mean, blowing it out is a dream for many, but it's easier said than done, I guess.
It simply means that you have to organize your life in such a fashion that you can divert some money to either buying your freedom, investments, or if you have debt, paying off that debt. You have to do that. And people say, well, I can't do that. I need to have this. I need to have the two least luxury cars, and we need to live in this neighborhood, and we need to send the kids to these schools. And I call that the tyranny of the must-haves. The more must-haves you have in your life, the less likely you are to become financially independent. Now, that's your choice. That's an individual's choice. It may very well be that those things are more important to you than buying your freedom. And it's your money. It's not for me to tell anybody how they should spend their money or what's important to me or what's important to them. For me, there was nothing I could spend my money on that was more important than my freedom, which is why from the beginning I diverted half of my income to buying that thing. It was never deprivation. Right? Most people say, this is a path of deprivation. I can't spend my money. Well, not for me. I spent every dime that ever came my way. It's just that I spent half of those dimes on the thing that I wanted to own the most, which was my freedom. And you own that by owning assets. So I wasn't depriving myself any more than if somebody said, I'm looking at buying a Mercedes or a Volkswagen, right? If I'm buy the Mercedes, I'm in this big fancy car and people will be impressed. If I buy the Volkswagen, I'm in this more modest car, but then I've got a whole bunch of money left over that I can spend on a wardrobe or going out to dinner or a more expensive apartment. It's just a matter of choosing where you spend your money on, right? So one of the choices, and I am under no illusion that most people who read my book will actually follow the simple path, because I think there's just way too much cultural influence to spend your money elsewhere. But at least the people who read the book and listen to this interview will be aware that there is something else they could buy with their money, and that's their personal freedom. And you do that by assets. And there was nothing more important to me, nothing I wanted more. So it was not deprivation at all.
I reflect back on where I used to be in my life, and if I'd heard this conversation then, I really, really struggled with saving money, because spending money was so closely linked to my sense of self and my self-esteem.
A lot of people feel that way.
I've shared this story before, but when I was working in those call centers at, which one? Swinton's car insurance, where I used to work, I would get my paycheck and it might be, I don't know, £1,500 or £2,000, whatever. And like on my way home on payday, I'd go buy a 60-inch TV and I'd put it in the house. And then I'd try and see if I had enough money to buy a PlayStation. Yeah. And then about a week later, when I realized that I was broke, I would sell both. And I look at that behavior as such absolute, like, it's objectively like crazy behavior. Like repeatedly.
It really is.
It's like crazy behavior.
Really is.
But it shows the extent to which I got a dopamine hit from having a nice thing. And I was trapped in that cycle of like, buy the nice thing, dopamine hit, feel validated, feel like I'm a successful person, and then have to sell it a week later.
Yeah.
So I really have a huge amount of empathy for people that are stuck in this spending for self-esteem cycle. And they hear they hear people like me and you talk about these things now, and it feels easier said than done.
That, to me, seems kind of insane. And one of the things that somebody pointed out one time is if you're driving around in a Ferrari Maybe you're thinking to yourself, if you're bought the Ferrari because you want to impress people, everybody's looking at me and they're thinking, wow, what a cool guy that is driving that Ferrari. No, that's not what they're thinking. They're looking at you in that Ferrari, and what they're thinking is, wow, I would look cool if I was driving that Ferrari. They're not thinking about you at all. You're making no impact on what their opinion of you is.
So on this point of debt, I did have some people contact me that were childhood friends of mine recently and asked me for advice on getting out of debt. Mm-hmm. And one particular friend said that he had $40,000 worth of debt and asked me for advice on it. And mm-hmm. I'm not an expert in this, so I kind of hesitated to give any advice. But the advice I'm hearing from you is essentially you have to make a concession. You have to pull back your spending and get things back under control. You have to, sell your house.
So here's some good news. So you're carrying to your friend, he's carrying $40,000 in debt, right? My advice would be, and this is a little different than the more common advice out there, but I would look at all my debts and I would pick the one that was charging me the highest interest rate. And I'd pay the minimums on all the others, and I would focus on paying that one down as fast as I could, because that's the biggest return on my investment. And when that one was gone, I'd go to the second until I worked my way through. It's going to be hard. And the more quickly you do it, the harder it's going to be, because you're going to have to make more dramatic adjustments to your life. That's the bad news. Here's the good news, is once you are out of debt, if you do this, you've developed a wonderful discipline of living on less than you earn and diverting the excess to something else that you want more. In this case, to something else you want more is being out of debt. If you continue with that discipline, you now have the cash flow to begin building those assets and becoming wealthy. You've already developed that lifestyle and that discipline. So that's the one ray of sunshine, if you will, in the process of getting out of debt.
Okay, to play devil's advocate with me then on this one.
Sure.
So when I was 18, 19 years old, my strategy, I was well aware that I'd fucked up my financial situation. It was patently clear that I'd figured out what a credit score was, and I realized that I'd destroyed mine. I also had these letters that, these bailiff letters. And I had mounting issues. I was avoiding finances, bills, envelopes, you name it. I just thought, if I don't look at it, it doesn't exist. Which I know a lot of people do, because when I was writing a previous book that I wrote, I looked into some of the stats about humans' ability to avoid, whether it's health situations. If a friend of yours gets a bad diagnosis, I was reading a study that said some people are more likely to not go get checked, even if their friends had it, because they just want to avoid it. And then with national finances, I was reading a study that said we're incurring billions and billions and billions and billions of debt as a society just because we don't look at our bank balance, we don't open envelopes. So I know I'm not the only one.
No, not at all.
My strategy was, this is such a dumb strategy.
I'm not sure I want to hear it, but go ahead.
Honestly, this sounds like crazy talk, but it's just the truth in my head. My strategy was, I'm going to get so rich that I outpace this debt, and then I'll deal with it later. My strategy was, if I can just get really rich, which is kind of the inverse of what you're advising, then this debt won't be a problem. At 18 or 19 years old, you don't know the world. You are guessing. And I was guessing that I could earn my way out of it. The probability says I was wrong. The probability says that I was like delusional or or just like I watched too many rap videos or something. So objectively, that is a reckless choice. Even if it's true and it ends up being true for you, you end up being what? It's still a bad choice because probability is stacked against you.
Well, that's true. But you just made a critical point in that you can make a bad choice where things work out well for you.
Yeah, exactly. It's still a bad choice.
So a great example of that is investing in Bitcoin, right? I'm not a proponent of investing in Bitcoin. Certainly, for those people who bought Bitcoin 10, 15 years ago, they've done extraordinarily well. They got lucky. Lots of speculations don't work out that well. So if you are speculating, then it might work out extraordinarily well for you. But you're taking some pretty heavy risks in doing that. Right? It's same thing with a lottery ticket. I mean, the chances of winning the lottery are infinitesimally small, but people buy lots and lots of lottery tickets. Somebody does win it. But that's probably not a good way to spend your money.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.